right, here we go. He'll run it out to the 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh, my God. Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game. Auburn's going to win the football game.
Dobbs drops back, looks, throws up, fires long for the end zone. The pass is going to be caught by Tennessee. Tennessee wins. Caught by Tennessee. Jawan Jennings. Jennings makes the catch in the end zone on the Hail Mary. I don't believe I saw that. To the right, Bennett to tight end left. Second and goal to go from the 2. Toss sweep right for James White. Puts it under the right arm. Puts it upfield. Driving forward. Diving to the goal line. A touchdown. And a title for the Patriots.
I can't believe it.
They have completed the greatest comeback in Super Bowl history.
This is the Saturday 6 podcast. We are now broadcasting on this beautiful Saturday morning. Thank you for tuning in to us. I am joined by my wonderful co-host, Christopher Mason. Chris, having a good morning?
Great morning so far. Shocked at some of these lines that have come out. Man, I'll tell you, I don't see how they came up with some of these. So it should be an interesting day here.
Yeah, some of these are very, very interesting. This is, we've been talking about it. This is, to me, the most important week in college football. I think at the end of the season, when the national title has been played, we're going to look back, and this will be the week that really defined the season. You've got teams like Ohio State and Penn State that at the moment don't look like they're in this chase yet, but they're looking to at least prove something this weekend with marquee matchups. You've got teams like Alabama and Georgia, who have tough matchups this weekend. They need to get those wins. And then you've got teams like Notre Dame and Miami and Wisconsin, who a lot of people have been doubting for the past several weeks. This is your opportunity to prove yourself to the country. Chris, let's get to our first game. Georgia travels to Auburn, Alabama, in Jordan-Hare Stadium. The Bulldogs favored by 2.5 points. And the over-under here, Vegas is telling you, defensive game, 47. I like a lot of what Auburn's done, but they had the weird loss to LSU. I think, though, Chris, you take that LSU loss out, Auburn looks like a really good team.
Yeah. They're going to probably have 4 losses and be the best 4-loss team ever in college football. But yeah, they look like a great team, but we'll end up probably with 4 losses.
You look at what they've done so far. Second game of the season, they traveled to Clemson, lost that one 14-7. I don't really hold that loss against them as much as the loss against LSU. Jarrett Stidham hadn't really found his rhythm yet. They're playing a very talented and experienced Clemson defense, and it's on the road. In Chris, this LSU game that they lost, they led that game for 3 quarters. They were smoking LSU. It looked like Auburn was going to run away with that one. So even in one of these 2 losses, they still dominated the game. Last week, Georgia struggled a little bit with South Carolina. Did you watch some of that game? What really happened with the Bulldogs last week?
Yeah, CJ, to be honest, I didn't watch the game, but really from what I, was able to hear about it, they were not able to run the ball as effectively as they have in the past, so that kind of had them to a slow start, but ended up, with a nice win.
They definitely struggled a little bit coming out of the gate, but even in that close win, they still outgained the Gamecocks 438 yards to 270, and they outrushed South Carolina 242 yards to just 43 from the Gamecocks. And here to me is the key, because Georgia's been doing this all season. They held the ball for 38 minutes in that game. I think if Georgia's able to do that against Jarrett Stidham and prevent that offense from coming onto the field, Georgia's going to have a good week. But Chris, this Auburn defense has been completely stout all season long. They're very, very good against the run. And by the way, they're ranked 3rd in the country this week. Coming into this week, I look at Auburn. I think this is like a really, really good all-around team. You look at what they've done so far. What is their key to winning this game?
Yeah, I'll give you 2 stat lines. Auburn allows 120 rushing yards per game. Georgia averages 280 rushing yards per game. So where does that end up? if Georgia is able to run the ball for over 200 yards, I think they win the game. If Auburn is able to keep them under 200 yards, I think Auburn has a good chance to win this game.
The other stat line, too, to throw at you is we talked about Jarrett Stidham. Auburn is averaging 230 passing yards per game. But the Bulldogs have a good secondary. They're just allowing 165 yards per game. And, last week, South Carolina's got that really talented quarterback. They go up against Georgia. Georgia's defense basically shut him down. Here, though, I think is the key, Chris. At home, Georgia's averaging 9 yards per pass. But when they go on the road, Jacob Fromm in this offense, they don't move the ball the same way. They're only averaging 6.5 yards per pass. I kind of feel like Auburn can stack the box, limit Georgia's running game a little bit, and in a way, this is kind of a mismatch for the Bulldogs. And keep in mind, Georgia, since the Notre Dame game, has not faced a team this good on the road, and Notre Dame doesn't have the same defense Auburn does.
Yeah, and that was the first game of the season Georgia played against Notre Dame, so there's been major changes to both teams.
That's definitely true. All right, let's get to our picks. Line here, Georgia favorite at Auburn, -2.5. Chris, where do you lean on this one?
So I've got a rule: don't bet against a home underdog, and I'm sticking to that here. I like Georgia's chances, but give me some points too. So I've got Georgia winning the game by 1 point, 28, Auburn 27.
Wow, we're really close on this one. I think this is the most unpredictable game of our slate. I mean, I looked at so many different stat lines, and you could really make an argument for either team here. Here's what I go with, though. Georgia's been good this season, dominating every game except at Notre Dame. Last week, they got off to a slow start, but really, if you watch the game, they still controlled the pace of it. Auburn's 2 losses have both been close, and they've both been on the road. And that first game was super early in the season against a playoff team, and it was before Jarrett Stidham really had found any rhythm. Their loss to LSU was on the road. Auburn still dominated the game for 3 quarters. Auburn gets to come home. I don't know that Georgia is as good as they're touted to be, although I do think they're good. I'm going to take off Auburn to win this one. I think they're going to pick off this upset. Give me the Tigers 21-20 over Georgia. So we both go with 1-point wins. Let's move on to our second game of the weekend. Big 12 matchup. This is a big one because it's going to have a big decision maker. The winner of this one has real control to make the Big 12 Conference Championship game. TCU at Oklahoma. The line here is the Sooners favored by 6.5 points and the over-under 61.5. Chris, TCU's looked pretty good so far.
Yeah, they've looked really good, and their defense, especially their run defense, has been amazing. I think they're first nationally on rushing yards allowed per game.
Yeah, no, people don't realize this. People think of the Big 12. You think of what you saw last week with Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, where it's 62-52. They put up almost basketball scores and football. But TCU has got as good of a defense as anybody in the country.
Yeah, their defense has been good, but the problem for them is who's on the other side of the ball. So you have the Heisman winner most likely. I think he's odds-on favorite to win the Heisman in Mayfield, and the passing attack of the Oklahoma Sooners. So it should be interesting, defense versus offense here in this game.
This was one of the things we talked about this past week was against Oklahoma State, the Sooners piled up 785 yards of offense, which is a lot. Quarterback Baker Mayfield threw for 598 yards. But the interesting part about that is he did that on just 24 completions. I mean, that is so few completions compared to how many yards he threw. That's amazing. So that tells you a lot of these plays are going for big yards. 5 of those 24 completions, by the way, were touchdowns. The Sooners, they don't just dominate there. They've got a good run game, and they outworked Oklahoma State in one time of possession, 36-24 last week. I think that's kind of a big stat line not many people are paying attention to. Because you look at Baker Mayfield, and I think he's great. I think the run game is great here. My question, though, is can Oklahoma's defense show up?
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be much of a problem. I think that they're going to be able to hold TCU because I just don't think TCU's offense is as good as people are telling them to be. They've been able to score on some short possessions because their defense has held the other teams so tight. So
Baker Mayfield doesn't really turn the ball over.
Yeah, not much. What does he have? Just a couple interceptions for the season, I think.
Yeah.
So to kind of prove the point that we're saying here, it's Oklahoma's offense versus TCU's defense. TCU allows 13.9 points per game for the season. Oklahoma scores 45 points per game. So I think that Oklahoma's defense is good enough to stop TCU. The question is TCU's defense good enough to stop this Oklahoma air attack?
Well, the line here is Sooners favored by 6.5 points. And again, that over-under 61.5. Chris, before we get to our picks, here's a couple of interesting lines to think about. Each of these last 5 meetings between these two programs have been decided by 7 points or fewer. So that tells you trend towards taking TCU in the points here. But Oklahoma is 7-1 against the spread in their last 8 games at home. TCU is 3-1 against the spread in their last 4 games against Oklahoma. So there's so many different ways you could go in this game. Line here again, Sooners by 6.5, over under 61.5. Chris, give us your prediction.
Before I do that, I'm going to give you a John Madden comment. And for the listeners that don't know the John Madden comment is, he once said, the team that scores the most points here is going to win the game. And so what I mean by that is Oklahoma is going to score the most points here just because they're not going to be able to get stopped. TCU will get stopped by the Oklahoma defense. I have Oklahoma winning the game pretty easily, and my line just went away from me. Give me just a second here. I'm pulling it back up. 37. Oklahoma 37, TCU 14. Big win for the Sooners. Oh, wow.
So you got the Sooners rolling in this one. There's a lot here to like with TCU, but Oklahoma has just been rolling lately. Baker Mayfield has been playing like a maniac all year. And their one loss against Iowa State, that's now looking like a good loss. They get this game at home, and Oklahoma's biggest weakness is defense. But TCU's offense only averages 24 points per game in their last 3 contests. I think that's a problem as they go on the road here. Give me Oklahoma 34-23 over the Sooners. Both Chris and I agree. Take Oklahoma, swallow those points because they're going to cover that 6.5 spread. Let's get to our third game. Michigan State travels to Ohio State. Line, Chris, this one's crazy. The line here is Buckeyes by 16.5. And the over-under 53.5. Chris, Ohio State's coming off that big blowout loss against Iowa. I can't for the life of me understand why they're favored by close to 20 points in this game.
It's this one. A couple of these shocked me, but this was the major one. Looking at this line, preparing for this show, and I was like, who in their right mind would bet against it? And I still don't know. So maybe that tells the listeners where I'm going with this one. But gosh, that's a lot of points.
It is. It is a lot of points at 16.5. And there's something else to keep in mind, Chris. Like Michigan State, 5-3 against the spread in their last 8 matchups. So it's not like some of these teams just don't do well against the spread, even though they look good. We'll get into a couple of those later. But, Michigan State against the spread is actually a good team. Ohio State had that big win a couple weeks ago against Penn State. We watched that game. I thought J.T. Barrett, I was going to put him in the Heisman conversation. Then last week, things got off ugly. Early pick 6. Iowa scores a bunch of points, wins it over Ohio State 55-24. Chris, between the Penn State game and the game last week against Iowa, what went on with Ohio State?
Yeah, a shocking loss there last week. I don't think anybody saw that coming, maybe unless you're an Iowa fan. But I to answer your question, I don't know. Sometimes teams just kind of have this mentally off week where they don't perform like they should, and I think that was Ohio State's week last week. They had a good chance to make it into the national championship or the playoffs, anyway, and just really lost it, in my opinion. I don't think they can recover from that loss.
In their last 4 games against top 10 teams, this is incredible. Last 4 games against top 10 teams, 3 of those games, Ohio State has lost by double-digit points. I saw that and I couldn't believe it, but you think about it. They lost last year in the playoff by a bunch. They lost this year to Oklahoma, and now they've lost to Iowa by a bunch. When they play good opponents, Ohio State hasn't really been showing up. But Chris, I look at this line and I'm like, maybe Vegas is on to something here. Urban Meyer getting blown out. I kind of like those odds coming off of a loss.
I don't know. The only thing I can think is the Michigan State game was such a weird game with a 3-hour rain delay, and guys were like taking naps during the middle of the game. And how much of a psyche does that play on Michigan State having to travel to Ohio State? I don't know. I don't see it though. I'm still shocked.
Well, the interesting thing about that is the visiting team in this matchup is 7-1 against the spread in their last 8 games. That's the visiting team is 7-1 against the spread. Chris, I look at that. I'm like, that's gotta favor Michigan State. But here is the interesting thing. Ohio State is 12-5 against the spread in their last 17 games coming off a loss. So I do like that stat. All right, let's get to our picks. Ohio State favored 16.5 points. Seems like a lot. Over under just 53.5. Chris, where do you go with this one?
I think that over-under is close. I've got it about 55 points, and I think Ohio State can win this game by about a touchdown. I was hoping the line would be like 8 or 9, somewhere in there. But so I've got Ohio State winning 31-24.
The Spartans stayed in the game against Penn State last week, but they came out on top 27-24 by just hanging around, rain delay, all of those things. Meanwhile, at the same time, Ohio State was getting blown out by Iowa. And this is one of those lines that really makes no sense. 16.5 points against a team that's ranked when this team's coming off a 31-point loss. Here's what I think they're looking at. JT Barrett is not going to duplicate that performance from last week. And I think a lot of Michigan State, Chris mentioned it was a weird game last week. I don't think Vegas likes Michigan State a lot. And I get Urban Meyer coming off of a loss. I know it's 16.5. But the line seems crazy. When the line seems crazy, I think it's because Vegas knows something. So I'm going to put my trust in Vegas. I'm giving them my money this week. Give me Ohio State blowing out Michigan State 35-13 at home. All right, let's get to our 4th game. Oklahoma State, the Cowboys, traveling to Iowa State. The line on the road, Oklahoma State favored by 6.5 in the over-under 60.5. Chris, that seems like a lot of points to be given a really good Iowa State team.
Yeah. I'm glad you said really good. I got in an argument on the internet, one of these stupid blogs with the Iowa State fan that said Iowa State is a great team because they beat 2 great programs. And I said, yeah, they had 2 really nice wins against Oklahoma, TCU, but losses against West Virginia, Iowa, and Texas. Great teams don't lose to West Virginia, Iowa, and Texas, not this year. So really good. I'll give you that. Great. Not so much.
Well, the interesting thing about that is 2 of those losses, Texas and Iowa, were before this new quarterback, Kyle Kempt, had come onto the scene. He came onto the scene against Oklahoma, and he's just been on fire, Chris. He's averaging over 200 yards per game. He's thrown 10 touchdowns, just 3 picks, and as a starter, he's 4-1. That includes wins over TCU and Oklahoma. Now, I know they had the loss at West Virginia last week. West Virginia is a weird place to go and play. The fans are absolutely ruthless. You're stuck in the middle of nowhere. It's higher elevation. And they stayed in the game for the most part there. Now they get to come home. I really like this quarterback. Here's my question, though, Chris. Is there anything else on this team besides this new quarterback that gives them an edge over Oklahoma State? And by the way, Cowboys have their own great quarterback, Mason Rudolph.
Yeah. Mason Rudolph has been great. I mean, They were in a barn burner last weekend. I forget the final score, but they scored a ton of points, had a bunch of yards. As we mentioned before, Oklahoma just had almost 800 yards and scored a few more points. So I don't take anything away from Oklahoma State with their loss last week. Is there anything that gives them an edge against Iowa? That gives Iowa State an edge here? I think if it's anything, it's their defense. I don't know that Oklahoma State's gonna be able to score the ball as much as they did in some of their prior matches here.
Well, no, that's definitely true. And I mean, you look at that game last week, that was really just a case of you're not going to stop Baker Mayfield this week. There's just nothing you can do. And he puts up 62 points on you. I do think Mason Rudolph, I mean, such a great quarterback. I think Oklahoma State is really well coached. Here's the interesting thing about Iowa State. They're 7-1-1 against the spread this season, 8-2-1 against the spread in their last 11 at home. This team, Chris, is a really good team when they come to play in their house. They've gotten big wins over Oklahoma and Texas in the past. I think that makes this one a little tough. Let's get to our picks. Cowboys favored on the road by 6.5, over under 60.5. What do you have, Chris?
So I'm going back to my rule. Don't take a home underdog. Don't bet against the home underdog. I actually like Iowa State to win this game.
Wow.
31-30.
Wow, so you got Iowa State winning this one. I think Iowa State's very tough to beat at home. They've been great against the spread this season. Oklahoma State, by the way, they have not 2-4 against the spread in the last 6 games. And Iowa State's coming off a loss. They get this one at home. Here's the kicker for me, though. Oklahoma State, when coming off of a loss, is 5-0 straight up and 4-1 against the spread in their last 5 games off a loss. That's a big deal for me. Vegas likes Oklahoma State a lot, and they're telling you, listen, we like this team so much. If you put them on a neutral field, they'd win by at least 10. I'm going to agree with Vegas again here. Give me the Cowboys 45-35. I think they cover that 6.5 point spread. All right, next game. Iowa. The Hawkeyes travel to Wisconsin, the Badgers. Wisconsin favored by 12.5 in this one. The over-under is 46. Chris, I've had my doubts about this Wisconsin team. If they finish undefeated, I wouldn't put them in my playoff. I don't think they've played anybody, but Iowa's not the same team when they have to travel on the road. You look at this game, it seems like you could go a lot of different ways with picking this one, but give me some notes here on this Iowa squad.
Yeah, so initially I was kind of shocked at this line too. It seems big, and it's our second game that has a large line over 10 points where it's against 2 ranked teams. So that was kind of surprising to me. But when I started to look at some of the details here, I started to lean more and more towards Wisconsin. Look, Wisconsin has to have this win. They can't go even with one loss and all their decisive wins to the final week of the season and have a chance to get into the playoffs.
Right. No, I completely agree with that one. And I mean, here's the thing. They're undefeated right now. Their only 2 wins against teams with winning records are Florida Atlantic and Northwestern. I mean, this is their first and so far only test of the season. You can't lose this game and have any chance to get in. Because if they lose this game, Chris, they're going to fall out of the top 12, and there's not enough time in the season to make that up.
Nope, not at all. You asked me to give you some stats on Iowa. Of course, they have a big win against Ohio State, just a complete bash against them. Besides that, they don't really have a lot to show as far as on the win side. They're a very balanced team. They average 218 yards passing and almost 150 yards running, and only 18 points a game. So they're just kind of good everywhere, not necessarily great on any one area.
Here's the reason, by the way, to pick Iowa to go into this one, and at least keep it close. In the last 13 games between these 2 teams, Iowa is 9-4 against the spread. Iowa is 5-0 against the spread when playing Wisconsin on the road in their last 5 games on the road against Wisconsin. That's amazing. in Wisconsin, their last 7 games at home, they don't have a big home advantage here. 2-3-2 against the spread in their last 7 at home. So, Chris, I look at this. I think Iowa's got a real chance to go in there and knock them off.
I disagree. It's a 12.5-point line, CJ. A lot of people disagree with that. I don't see much of a chance Iowa traveling here against a very good Wisconsin.
Well, we mentioned how good Iowa's been at home, 5-1 against the spread when playing at home this season, but they are 2-1 when they are on the road this year, so they have not been a good road team this season. Chris, Badgers favored by 12.5. They need the big win, over under 46. Give me your pick.
Yeah, I think it's a very close line. I have Wisconsin winning this game 34-20.
34-20. You and I have the exact same spread here of points. Listen, Wisconsin's been rolling teams lately, but they've been weak teams. Iowa's coming off a huge win against Ohio State, and I don't like the hangover play here. That's going to be a tough week of practice, trying to tell the kids, hey, we've got to work on something. They're thinking, work on what? We just beat Ohio State by 31. On top of that, half of the media has been doubting Wisconsin all week. I think that gives the coach a lot to play with here. They're not very high in the rankings. They need a big win. I'm going to take Wisconsin at home to get the win here and cover 12.5. 27-13. Badgers beat Iowa this afternoon. All right, let's get to our last game of the weekend. Chris, this is a big one. The Fighting Irish of Notre Dame, currently in the playoff hunt, travel to undefeated Miami to play the U. Notre Dame favored by 3.5. The over-under 57.5. Convicts versus Catholics, part 2. Chris, it looks like it's going to be a fun one.
Man, this game, I am excited for this game. You took the words out of my mouth with the Converts versus Catholics. I thought you were going to skip that and give it to me,
oh no,
you stole it. Thank you. So I'm going to give you a couple. One thing that was surprising last week is Notre Dame allowed 37 points against Wake Forest. Prior to that, they averaged allowing 14 points in their last 4 games, including games against NC State and USC, who have had very good offenses this week. So it's kind of combating there, like which Notre Dame defense is going to show up in this game.
No, that's a good point. No, I think that Wake Forest team is better than people believe. Like Wake Forest, I honestly think that's one of the better teams in the ACC. Now, that being said, they're not to the same level as a USC or NC State, so it still is interesting. All of a sudden, last week, Notre Dame really struggling to keep the Deacons out of the end zone. Interesting note here, when these teams have played, the Irish are 3-0 straight up and against the spread in their last 3 games against the Hurricanes. So if we go with tradition, Chris, history tells us the Catholics get the win in this one and typically cover 3.5 points.
Yeah. Jumping over to Miami, they're coming off a statement win against the absolutely inferior Virginia Tech at home last week. And this is the second week in a row that they're underdogs at home. If they have something to play for to prove themselves again this week, that should be it.
This is kind of the thing about Miami. I think they're kind of like, and I don't mean this in a bad light, like you could make it out to be. They're kind of in a weird way like the Raiders of the NFL, or maybe a better version is like the Seahawks of the NFL, where they feel like they're secluded in their own separate part of the country and nobody ever pays them attention or gives them enough credit. So you go into Miami, they're going to be playing fierce. Mark Richt is a good coach. The Irish are ranked 3rd in the college football playoff top 25, but they're 3-9 straight up in their last 12 road games against teams with winning records. So, Chris, when the Irish have to travel and play a team with winning records, they have not done very well.
Yeah, I didn't realize that stat. They kind of seem to be the team that chokes in the big game over the last several seasons.
Yeah.
That happened to them first game of the season against Georgia. I think they had a good chance to win that game and kind of let it go.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. They're kind of weird when they have to play the big game. I didn't know that stat though.
Yeah, and they're also 3-11 against the spread in their last 14 games in November. That's another one. Is this team is hot in October, but when we get into November, that's when they start struggling. And last week against Wake Forest, you saw the struggles on defense start happening. But I think regardless of all of that, they've been rolling recently. They're 6-1 against the spread in their last 7 games. Miami against the spread in their last 13 games, 9-4. The Hurricanes are 7-0 straight up and against the spread in their last 7 games played in the month of November. So this is the interesting thing about this game to me, Chris. Notre Dame's not great in November. Miami's been absolutely terrific in November. We talk, though, about Notre Dame struggling in big games, but Mark Richt is notorious when he was at Georgia for always not being able to take the team to the next level. Is this one of those games where maybe that comes back to haunt him a little bit?
I don't see it happening. They're at home against a big win. I think they have momentum coming in with the Catholics coming into play against them. So I like Miami a lot in this game.
All right, so we know your rule. You like to take teams, underdogs that are at home. Notre Dame favored by 3.5. I mean, Vegas is telling you we like Notre Dame so much going into Miami, we're going to give them 3.5 points. That seems like a crazy line to me. Chris, where do you go with this one?
Miami's defense is the best defense Notre Dame will see all season, including Georgia, who has a very stout defense. I don't think they're going to be able to move the ball hardly at all. I've got Miami winning 27, Notre Dame 17.
Wow, we're really close on this one. There's a lot of things to like about Notre Dame, but my biggest problem with this team is that they're so one-dimensional on offense with having to be able to run the ball. They do not have a great passing offense. Miami has a stout defense, but they haven't been great against the run this season, so there is something interesting to pay attention to there. That could be a problem for the Hurricanes. I think what this comes down to, however, is Miami's quarterback, Malik Rozier. If he comes out and he throws interceptions early and gets the turnover bug, I think Notre Dame could not only win, but roll the Hurricanes. If he comes out, though, and he's efficient and moves the ball down the field, I really like Miami in this one. I'm going to take the Convicts 27-20. I'm gonna take them to cover that 3.5 point spread, and they're gonna win 27-20. All right, Chris, this is gonna be an incredible Saturday of college football. Any final notes as we close out the podcast?
Last week 5-1, baby. Loved it. Loved the lines last week. Also, shout out to a listener, JJ. He gave you several picks. Some of them are the picks that we saw in the Saturday 6 show. But if you go in the comments of our Facebook stream, you'll see him. He loves Wisconsin being upset this week. So we picked the same line on that one. He's going the other way.
Yeah, he loves Wisconsin. I believe he also likes Georgia this weekend, if I'm not mistaken, and Notre Dame.
Yeah, I forget exactly, but there's 5 or 6 games that he picked and gave it to
so, I mean, it was an interesting comment the way he was throwing them out there. So make sure you go into the Facebook comments of our CJ Sweat Show live Facebook video and read what Mr. JJ put out on the show. Again, you can always find all of our information, a lot of things there at cjsweatshow.com. I'm going to put out some other picks up for the weekend there as well that you all can run with. And we will be back Wednesday, live, 7 p.m. Thank you guys for joining us. This is the Saturday 6 podcast.